Now, drink this, son. It'll make you feel better.
Hey there everyone, I'm Stu Pollard, and welcome to the 80's Emporium, your home for everything 80's. Well, mostly 80's.
You'll have to explain that.
As you likely know by now, once a year we deviate from our traditional throwback theme and instead focus on a certain and highly delicious adult beverage.
Bourbon?
Bourbon?
Bourbon.
Because while September is memorable for lots of reasons, September is also National Bourbon Heritage Month. Now, we've had an incredible response to our first two Bourbon in the Movies episodes, so we're coming right back at you here in 2021 with part 3.
Third time's a charm.
And we are very excited to also be bringing back a very special guest and our resident 80's Emporium bourbon expert, Jason Brauner. Jason of Bourbon's Bistro and Buzzard Drew's Sippin' Whiskeys will also provide some background on many bourbon brands that we feature in today's episode. So fill up a glass with my favorite spirit and let's get on with it. Jack Nicholson has a pretty good track record of drinking bourbon on film, and in Chinatown he is at it again. This time he's pouring it for Burt Young, who's just learned about his wife's affair. Notice that Jack reaches for a more expensive bourbon first before settling on the old standby Old Crow.
Old Crow, named for James C. Crow, was actually the original distiller of Old Crow. They started it just out as Crow whiskey, and then they decided to put the Old Crow on there. At one point, way back in the day, it was the top seller in the United States.
Jack prepares many drinks throughout the film, and they're all very healthy pours. While we cannot see the brands in all of these cases, we think it's pretty safe to assume that he's attempting to continue his bourbon buzz. Accountant Frank Bigelow is a big drinker and knows what bourbon is supposed to taste like, so when his bourbon is swapped out for a doctored version, he is able to instantly tell that something is amiss. But it's not until later that he learns he's been poisoned with an incurable toxin. The moral here is, don't take your eye off your beverage, especially when you know somebody wants to kill you. In addition to being a tasty beverage, bourbon can also be used to calm the nerves. In 1999's The Mummy, after a run-in with Emotep, Stephen Dunham needs a bit more than one drink.
I'm going downstairs. Get me a drink. You want some?
Yeah, give me a glass of bourbon.
All right.
And a shot of bourbon.
Yeah, okay.
And a bourbon chaser.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he doesn't live long enough to enjoy it. When Marty McFly travels back to the 50s to rework the events of his mother's prom, we see 3D spiking the punch bowl with a bottle of Early Times. What's interesting is we never see this happen in the first film, but we do see George McFly drinking the very same punch without noticing. FYI, bourbon and fruit punch do not usually mix well together. Now later on, Biff is handed that empty bottle of Early Times and he shatters it, further cementing his place as the villain.
Early Times, then and now, it's had a checkered past. At one time it was a straight Kentucky bourbon, then it became a blend, then it became a straight bourbon again, and now I think it's back to a blended product. It was a favorite at Churchill Downs for a long time, so that helped with the popularity of it.
If you're enjoying this video, please take out a moment to click subscribe, hit the notification bell, and be the first to know when we post brand new content like this. Now while bourbon is generally sweeter than the average spirit, it's still a powerful beverage and not for everyone. If you're like Will Ferrell and the other guys, you may wish for a less intense alcoholic beverage. But some people know the value of bourbon. In Pulp Fiction, when Uma Thurman orders a milkshake that costs $5, John Travolta can't believe it's non-alcoholic.
Did you just order a $5 shake?
Mm-hmm.
That's a shake. That's milk and ice cream.
Last I heard.
That's $5. You don't put bourbon in or nothing? No. Just checking.
In Bad Teacher, Cameron Diaz often gets through a rough day of school with the help of her old friend Jim Beam for support.
Want to get wasted?
Yeah.
Cool. See ya.
While we don't condone drinking on school grounds, we do have to applaud the work that went into making her secret compartment.
Yeah, Jim Beam, it's usually 4 years old. The #1 selling bourbon in the world. If you've ever seen the production line, it's pretty fast.
In The Graduate, Anne Bancroft's first step in attempting to seduce Dustin Hoffman is to offer him, of course, what else?
What do you drink? Bourbon?
Now later on, upon running into Mr. Robinson, Dustin is offered his choice of bourbon or scotch. He asks for bourbon, but his request is sadly ignored.
Scotch? Bourbon.
Ever loyal to his favorite beverage, Dustin Hoffman never takes a sip of scotch in that movie.
Scotch still your drink? Bourbon.
We don't know what whiskey he was drinking, but they do have these wooden guys. And for some reason back in the 60s, I guess it stemmed from Prohibition, where people used to hide their booze. And I guess a lot of these things carried on several years afterwards.
Now, Jack Nicholson is not the only Los Angeles detective that's been known to drink bourbon. From Kentucky Tavern to Old Fitzgerald Bottle and Bond, Denzel Washington as Detective Easy Rollins drinks a variety of bourbons in Devil in a Blue Dress. Even if his journey through the criminal underbelly of LA isn't necessarily a smooth one, his bourbon selections certainly are.
From 1948, Old Fitzgerald, I don't think he really got much better than that. Fitzgerald was just a top-notch bourbon, and if anybody knows the name Stitzelweller, you know bourbon.
If you're watching this video, chances are you might be a bourbon fan. If so, know that we're selling our very own 80's Emporium bourbon that we've hand-selected, currently available from our friends at the Wine Rack, so be sure to check out that link below. If you're anything like me, and I hope you're not, but if you are, you're probably asked your significant other every now and then, "Where'd you hide the bourbon, honey?" With a date waiting for her downstairs, Brooke Bundy thinks nothing of it when she hears this request.
Lane, where do you keep the bourbon?
I'll be right down.
Her mistake.
I said, where's the fucking bourbon?
That's right, folks. Bourbon, the official drink of Freddy Krueger. In this intimate sequence, from out of sight, Jennifer Lopez allows George Clooney to share her bourbon due to the slow service at the bar.
You help yourself.
You like bourbon?
I love it.
We got that out of the way. Tell me, Celeste, what do you do for a living?
While they're both very attractive people, I still don't know if I'd share my bourbon with either of them, especially after COVID. Sam Raimi, the director of the Spider-Man trilogy in the 2000s, is a notable fan of Maker's Mark. In fact, the red wax-covered bottle appears in all 3 Spider-Man films. But despite his love of the brand, the drink is always associated with the film's villains. In 2002's Spider-Man, Willem Dafoe pours himself a glass of Maker's Mark just before he starts hearing voices, beginning his descent into madness and becoming the Green Goblin. Like father, like son, right? This time it's James Franco playing Dafoe's son in the next film, who pours himself a glass of bourbon, but before he gets to enjoy it, it's snatched away by Alfred Molina's Doc Octopus. By 2007, Franco has switched over to martinis, but in an ensuing fight with Tobey Maguire, we see that he has indeed kept that Maker's Mark bottle. Unfortunately, instead of being enjoyed by Franco, it simply becomes kindling.
How'd you like that, Spidey?
Being a detective is hard work, but it's even tougher on the nerves when you got to deal with cartoon characters. But Bob Hoskins is constantly drinking whiskey throughout the course of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, with his drink of choice being Wild Turkey. But word of his constant inebriation has gotten around town, so much so that his colleagues have started to call him names.
Didn't you used to be Eddie Valiant? Or did you change your name to Jack Daniels?
Of course, we know better. Jack Daniels is not a bourbon, but a Tennessee whiskey.
After talking with Jimmy Russell several years ago, Wild Turkey is in every country that they can be in. I can remember Jimmy saying that, their yeast strain was so important to them that when they left the distillery back in the 60s and 70s, that there would be 5 yeast strains that would leave the distillery, go home with a different person and sit in their fridge just in case something happened to one of them or something happened at the distillery, that they'd always have that mash bill there.
However, Bob eventually realizes he's been wasting too much of his life being drunk, and so he destroys his flask.
Let's go.
Now I want to hear from you. What's your favorite film appearance by a bottle of bourbon? Do you have any ideas for movies we can use for next year? Comment below, hit us up on social media, and when you do, use the hashtag 80's Emporium. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Stu Pollard with the 80's Emporium. We will see you next time.
Thanks. I needed that.